Welcome to Stand in the Gap Today from the American Pastors Network. We proclaim truth in the public square by connecting a biblical worldview and constitutional principles to the most significant news of the day. Simple, careful, and truthful. That's Stand in the Gap Today. Now, here's your host.
Hello, I'm Isaac Crockett. Thanks for joining us today on Stand in the Gap on this Friday. And joining me today will be Sam Rohrer, the president of the American Pastors Network and the host of this program. And as we, get started on this Friday, where I, take some time to ask Sam different questions from what has been happening in the news, of course, we're looking at and thinking about all that's been going on with the issue surrounding whether or not the Supreme Court is indeed looking at overturning Roe versus Wade. And I can think back, my whole life has been, since Roe v. Wade, that was decided well before I was born. And all of my, memories of thinking about pro-life and abortion have, been going way back, early memories of going with my parents in our church to hold up signs, to protest, to go in different places and say, things like, adoption is the love option, or God forgives, or, different things like that. But I think it's just a little over 5 years ago, I remember seeing a sign. I was at the March for Life, and it was, I think, the first time. It wasn't his first time to speak there, but it was Mike Pence, I think, the first time for a sitting vice president to speak. And I've since been there when Donald Trump, who was the only president to speak at one, also spoke. But I was there with my oldest son, and the boards that they were handing out, the signs to hold up, were saying, the ones that were circulated the most were studentsforlife.org, and they said, "I am the pro-life generation." And there were just thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of young people. And that's one of the things that I've often reported on when I'm at, March for Life, especially the one in D.C., is that even when I was, even 5 years ago, even when I was in my mid-30s or something, I felt old, and I guess maybe I often feel old, but I felt like I was one of the oldest ones in the crowd. The majority of those marching were college students, early 20s, late teens, and high school students, and even middle school and elementary school age students were there. And it was just exciting to see a young generation that had this as their goal, was to see, pro-life laws made and to see Roe v. Wade overturned. That's something we've been praying for my whole life. And so, now to see these leaks supposedly coming from the Supreme Court justices showing that they are ready to actually overturn Roe v. Wade. Sam, I know you and constitutional attorney David New, you've talked about this, and it's been talked about on our program before, but really the Roe versus Wade, the whole thing was wrong from the get-go, shouldn't have even gone to trial. It wasn't a federal issue. It's always been for the states to decide. And so, we could go into that, but I guess what I'm talking about, or what I want to talk about today, Sam, is if this leak turns out to be reality, this could be a change. This could become a pro-life generation. Generation Z could be a pro-life generation. And so I was just wanting you to discuss, your opinion on how monumental of a change this could be for our nation.
Well, Isaac, I think in reality, and you referenced it, from a legal perspective, and this is what we talked about it in our program, David New and I talked about it, is that the only reason it's a major issue out there, let's put this way, not the only reason, but a major reason why the leak is being acted upon with such emotion and protest, is that we have a young generation of people who don't understand the Constitution. And as David said, and I tend to agree with him, it's a failure of public education to even teach about civics. Because here is the issue, and it goes to the heart of it. It doesn't make any difference what the U.S. Supreme Court says on this issue. The issue they're deciding is whether or not the decision ought to be made by the U.S. Supreme Court. They're not making the determination on a moral issue saying that it is wrong or it is right. The technicalities of their decision is that it wasn't their jurisdiction to make a decision in the beginning. Where does it belong? in the states. Now, why does it belong in the states? Because we're a representative republic. And all of these kinds of issues, moral issues of this type, are all to be determined by the individual states, which means, yes, in fact, you could have a California and New York, which are killing babies by the millions. But you may have an Indiana or an Alabama that says, you're not going to kill one of them here intentionally. All right. So you would have a scattering of things across the country. So the court is not making the determination on the morality of the issue as much as on the constitutionally of the decision of where that matter ought to be made. So that's a very, very important thing. Now, here's the deal, though. The left and those who have the national voice, congressional leaders and others that are on this issue, they're talking about it in terms of now the government will now say that abortion is moral, or they're going to say abortion is, or in this case, is unlawful and therefore immoral. This is not going to be a decision, Isaac, of the morality of abortion. It's going to be talking about the jurisdiction of who makes the decision, and that, I think, is an important thing to understand as we further talk about this issue.
That is very important. That this is saying, whose decision is this, and that brings us to a whole other part. Well, I want to focus on the states. The state that I live in, I'm on the border of Pennsylvania and New York, but I'm technically in New York. Our governor, Kathy Hochul, just I'm reading the headline news, and I'm seeing that we have this major shortage of infant formula. And so even Elise Stefanik, who's a representative, congressional representative in my state, has a 9-month-old baby, and she's talking about how difficult it is to find in New York State baby formula. And while all of that is going on, I see that our governor decides that because of these leaks that might mean that the Supreme Court might be, overturning Roe v. Wade, saying it goes to the states. Our state already has tons of legality pushing abortion, and we're going to basically become, many are saying, an abortion tourist destination. She decides that she needs to put $35 million of taxpayers' money towards the abortion groups. And so, it's so important, and we'll talk about this as we come back here, Sam, because we're running out of time now. But I think it's so important to understand that this is, a state's issue, but then also how important it is for all of us in our states and local, elections and things like that to get involved. Because, you have, for example, in New York, we're already very, very liberal when it comes to abortion laws, basically allowing it all the way up into birth, which some consider infanticide. And I was reading a New York Post article saying that didn't change our laws. If Roe v. Wade is overturned, it doesn't change our laws, but instead now our governor thinks she needs to give more to it. And I think we're going to continue to see New York and California, New Jersey, a lot of these very liberal states. You'll see them go down that rabbit hole, so to speak. But hopefully, we'll also see conservative states standing up. And then this will become a fight on the state level, very likely. So a lot of interesting things, Sam. I have a lot of questions to throw your way to ask you about this, but we're going to take our first time out. When we come back from this brief timeout, listening to our partners, we want to discuss the recent, at least 3 leaks, many are saying, that have come from the Supreme Court of the United States. So we're going to be right back to discuss that after these quick messages.
Faithful listeners to Stand in the Gap today and guests alike appreciate the regular focus on truth and the analysis of the news from a biblical and constitutional perspective. Here's a comment from Dr. Alex McFarland, speaker, author, apologist, and founder of the ministry Truth for a New Generation.
By the way, let me say how much I appreciate, Sam, what you all do in the American Pastors Network. And folks, I've pastored 2 churches and spoken in 2000. And I just want to encourage everybody to pray for what Sam and his staff are doing and to support and be involved. And frankly, I'm just applauding you. I follow your trajectory, Sam, and the American Pastors Network, and I'm thrilled that God has raised you up at this time.
Thank you, Dr. McFarland. You and our other great guests help to make Stand in the Gap today a leading voice in the faithful communication of truth all across America. May God use all of us together to stand in the gap for truth.
All across America, parents find themselves considering whether homeschooling might be a viable option for their children during this time of COVID lockdowns and mask mandates. As a homeschooling mom, I'd like to tell you why BJU Press offers you the support and materials you need to give your child a well-rounded education. BJU Press approaches each subject from a biblical worldview perspective. God and His Word aren't just an add-on in Bible class. Rather, our amazing, all-powerful, creative, majestic God is present not only in science and history, but in English, math, reading, music, art, and more. Your children will be challenged and encouraged to seek Him with all their hearts, while learning and growing in wisdom and knowledge. And isn't that what we want for them? Whether you prefer a traditional textbook education, the flexibility of online learning, or a mix-and-match approach, BJU Press has what you need. Visit their website at bjupresshomeschool.com. That's bjupresshomeschool.com.
Here's Twyla Braze with today's Health Freedom Minute.
The confidential documents which Pfizer wanted to slowly release over a period of 75 years are being rapidly released every month by court order. The latest 80,000 pages were released the first week of May. One of the amazing findings within these documents is that 22 groups of people were excluded from the clinical trials, including pregnant women and breastfeeding women. Thus, there are no safety data on the use of the Pfizer vaccine in pregnant or breastfeeding women. Pregnant women have nonetheless been encouraged to get the shot. Meanwhile, Department of Defense data show a significant increase in congenital malformations, from nearly 11,000 in 2020 to nearly 19,000 in the first half of 2021.
Help us secure health freedom for all. Visit cchfreedom.org. That's cchfreedom.org.
This is Tim Barton from Wall Builders with another moment from American history. Alexis de Tocqueville, a political official from France, traveled to the United States in 1831 and penned his observations in the now famous book Democracy in America. Being from France, what he found in America was completely unexpected to him. He reported, "Upon my arrival in the United States, the religious aspect of the country was the first thing that struck my attention. And the longer I stayed there, the more I perceived the great political consequences resulting from this. In France, I had almost always seen the spirit of religion and the spirit of freedom marching in opposite directions. But in America, I found that they were intimately united and that they reigned in common over the same country." De Tocqueville recognized that it was biblical Christianity and the morals it produced that made America great. For more information about Alexis de Tocqueville and the positive influence of Christianity in early America, go to wallbuilders.com.
You're listening to Stand in the Gap today. For more information, visit our website at standinthegapradio.com.
Well, welcome back to the program. I'm Isaac Crockett, and on this Friday edition of Stand in the Gap Today, I'm asking Sam about some of the headlines, and the headlines that we're most focused on right now have to do with the Supreme Court and the possible opportunity to kind of throw out Roe versus Wade, to set it aside as not really being a precedent to follow. And we're looking today, could this become a pro-life generation? Could Generation Z, or perhaps the generation after them, be really considered a pro-life generation? My generation, we've only known abortion. Before the millennials were even born, abortion was set up as a precedent for the land. And now, if this gets reversed, could this mean the opposite effect? And so we're talking about that. Sam, I want to talk to you about these leaks. So much of what we're talking about, really all of what we're talking about, is coming from the assumption that June, by the end of June, the Supreme Court is going to make public, knowledge of the ruling they had. And so here's it. Just to me, it seems very unusual that we would have leaks from the Supreme Court of the United States. And unfortunately, I think that leaks of this nature have become more and more common from the White House and from congressional committees and those sort of things. But it does seem like at least the Supreme Court still has a high amount of integrity, that it seems very rare for a leak like this to happen, from what I can tell. But I was reading an article from MSNBC. It's a very liberal take on what's going on. The article is called "Supreme Court Springs Brand New Leak," and it's written by Steve Bannon for MSNBC. And in it shows that there have been at least 3 leaks in the last few days, since May 2nd to May 11th, that there were like 3 leaks. The first one was the leak that showed Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito's draft opinion that showed that they were no longer going to consider Roe v. Wade the precedent for the nation. The second leak that he claims happened was May 7th. There was a leak that showed that Chief Justice Roberts tried to come up with a compromise. And then they're claiming that the third leak happened May 11th, and it showed basically no one wanted to make that compromise. The conservative justices are sticking with what they originally went with. And here was what the article from MSNBC then said. It said, there were hopes in some circles that Alito's radical draft opinion might lead to the circulation of alternative drafts, but apparently that hasn't happened, reinforcing impressions that the Roe precedent's days are numbered. So, Sam, I'm just wondering, how important, how significant is it that we've seen 3 leaks from the Supreme Court in just a matter of about 9 days?
It is significant. I think it is. But, we are responding, generally culture is responding with great angst and great fears of harm being done to this institution, the judiciary. I'd say, is that valid? And I say, yeah, that is a concern. But at the same time, what did we just go through? Not the last 2 years under the Biden administration, but what did we go through the previous 4 years of Trump? Leak after leak after leak after leak. Coming from where? Secret White House, confidential White House meetings in the White House. Leaks coming from National Security Agency leaks. Leaks coming from the FBI. Leaks theoretically coming from the CIA. Isaac, we're in a leaky time. And the problem with it is that the leak, I'm going to conjecture, is of the same worldview that caused all of those other leaks to go before. Because what it is, Isaac, there's the heart of this issue is that we're dealing in a lawless culture. And we're dealing with people who in office are there no longer being guided by integrity, truth, obligation to their oath. Even a staff member's take an oath to the Constitution. So do the members of the NSA. Good grief. But yet things were coming out that were compromising national security. They were actually undermining the executive authority under the past president of the executive branch. Well, these kind of things have been happening out of the legislative branch. When you got these fake, impeach the president type things that were going underway and manufacturing, actually making up stories, that's just, it's not a leak, but it's of the same type. Isaac, we are witnessing the devolution of the institution of government based on law. To me, that's the real issue at stake here.
In building on that issue, this we're seeing all this footage of people, just droves of people going up to the personal homes of the Supreme Court justices. But it's not just that. We've seen it happen to Democrats like Joe Manchin from West Virginia, or to Republicans or different ones over the last, again, going back to even the end of Trump's presidency and through Biden, that when groups don't get their way, they go after personal attack. And I don't just mean the ad hominem attacks that may or may not be true, but they literally go to those people. They find them out in public trying to eat. They find their location of where they live, that sort of thing, and they do these protests. And I want to ask you, and you've been in public service. You've spent almost 2 decades of your life as a lawmaker. In your opinion, we have, the right for free speech and things, but is it ever okay for lawmakers or for judges to be singled out at their own private residences for protesters to try to influence the outcome of something? Is that ever okay, or maybe you say maybe certain times it is, certain times it isn't, or how would you see that?
Not in a society where you're governed by law. Now, that represents, I mean, has that kind of thing happened before? The answer is yes, but not in a constitutional republic that's guided by law and by an oath that predisposes that there is self-discipline and an adherence to doing that which is right, where there's an agreed-upon opinion in what is definition of right, and that's our problem today. Those kind of times would not have allowed, the law would not have allowed intimidation of a public officer or in a public setting. Now, you can go and you can protest the decisions that are being made, but to attack the individual or his family or his children, well, frankly, even members of House delegations, of state delegations, if they are threatened in their position, them personally or their family, their children, that used to be a circumstance where the FBI would get immediately involved. It was not permitted by law. But Isaac, the law is permitting this kind of thing. Matter of fact, to me, what's actually happening is you actually have some of the members of law. You actually have Congress people, and you have people in positions of Justice Department who are actually encouraging lawless action. So it comes back to that matter, which is at stake. The leaking is an action. It's the choice behind it to disregard restraint, to violate obligations, decisions, oaths, commitments to those. If a person does not if a person does not understand what integrity is, why would they ever be predisposed to defend it? We're in a time we don't even know what integrity is. And people make up truth whenever they want to make it up. That's why this kind of thing happens, and why, at the end of the day, probably nothing's going to happen, even if they do find out for sure the individual who did this.
Well, going in that line, looking at violence, for example, and this lack of restraint, lack of self-discipline, we have seen more churches and pro-life centers targeted. There was a center in Madison, Wisconsin, that was set on fire with a Molotov cocktail, according to reports. We've seen churches, services, and masses interrupted with people screaming and different things pro-abortion activists. Now, I just want to, I don't like the word devil's advocate. I don't like that phrase necessarily, but I want to just kind of say what the other side is maybe saying. The prochoiceamerica.org, they put out this. They said that anti-choice zealots, in other words, pro-lifers, murdered 11 people, including doctors, clinic employees, and a clinic escort, a security guard, and a police officer between 1993 and 2016. They also say that there were 26 attempted murders in that same period. Now, those statistics are coming from the United States and Canada, as best as I can tell. So, Sam, with this recent increase because of these purported leaks from the Supreme Court, recent violence and protesting going on, affecting churches and Christian groups and pro-life groups, is this at all similar to what has been going on? Is this just pro-lifers are getting what they deserve? They've been doing that, and now it's getting back to them? Or is there this different? Do you see any differences in how this is being organized or how this is happening? You mentioned, the lack of restraint, lack of self-discipline. Is that something that's going on here?
Well, no, Isaac, it is different. Those who have supported life, and who say life is a gift from God, they understand that there are restraints by the God who gives life. Restraints in what they do. Oh, yeah, you may have an outlier here or there that maybe does something, but it's never the subject of or encouraged by the leadership of pro-life organizations. It never has been, ever. So, but it is the opposite on the other side of that. I mean, even over the weekend, there's an organization called Ruth Sent Us. Ruth Sent Us is a left organization. They called for protests and damage to evangelical churches beginning on Mother's Day because of their opposition to this group. They were in support of abortion. They were going to target the churches who were in favor of pro-life. No, Isaac, it's not the same at all.
it's different. Those in the leaders of the pro-life movement, that they don't condone when violence happens. They all condemn it, it seems. And this way we see it looks like it's almost being encouraged by some. So we have more to talk about that. We're going to take another quick time out. When we come back, we want to talk more about the changes that have happened since 1973 till 2022. We'll be right back.
Listeners all across America are thanking God for Stand in the Gap today. Listen to what Carol, a faithful partner from Southeast Pennsylvania, says about Stand in the Gap today.
Hello, my name is Carol, a regular and faithful listener of Stand in the Gap Today, a daily one-hour program heard Monday through Friday. The program hosts talk to interesting and fascinating guests who will discuss some of the most important issues of our day and time from a constitutional and biblical worldview. I hope you will join me for Stand in the Gap Today, a daily one-hour program heard Monday through Friday. You'll be so glad you did, and remember, the American Pastors Network covets your prayers and financial support.
Thanks, Carol. Your prayer and financial support of this program has helped us to become the main source of trustworthy news analysis for so many people. If you're listening to me right now and you've never contacted us like Carol did, would you do so now? Partner with us in prayer and finances by going to standinthegapradio.com. And if you're benefiting from this program, tell a friend.
So to be clear, women can be called women again? For the Colson Center, I'm John Stonestreet with a point. Over a month ago, Supreme Court nominee Ketanji Brown Jackson was asked to define woman. Her response, I'm not a biologist. Well, that was just a week or so after a biological male had won the NCAA Women's Swimming Championship. Many gender scholars were quick to support Jackson and pointed out biological anomalies such as people who are born intersex. But intersex and other disorders of sexual development are exceptions. They don't erase the basic biological category of a woman. Now, ironically, many who remain silent on what a woman is during the NCAA championships are not silent during the potential loss of the so-called right to abortion. For example, Vice President Kamala Harris proclaimed in a speech, how dare they try to deny women their rights and their freedoms, assuming that we should all know perfectly well what a woman is and that the definition has to do with certain biological functions and that you don't need to be a biologist to know that. See, once again, God's design is revealed to be reality. I'm John Stonestreet.
When we look around, we can see the devil at work, sure. But more powerfully, we can see our great God at work, and He's moving His plan of redemption ahead right on time. God's Spirit's moving in the hearts of His people, too. Do you sense His hand? If so, we've got a job to do. So let's pray. Let's be truth tellers. Let's help lead people to a genuine return to God. Only true revival can bring peace in times of war and God's blessings in times of judgment. Visit our website at standinthegapradio.com or search on Amazon for our powerful tool specifically designed to equip believers for these days. Order our Return to God Journey Guide, designed for personal training or within small groups or Sunday school classes. This small booklet is made to coordinate with our 11 Principles for National Renewal Stand in the Gap TV series. Learn more about the Return to God Journey Guide by going to standinthegapradio.com or search for it on Amazon.
You're listening to Stand in the Gap today, discussing the pressing issues facing our culture from a biblical and constitutional perspective. Now let's rejoin our host.
Welcome back to this Friday edition of Stand in the Gap today. I'm asking Sam questions about abortion, about the leaks from the Supreme Court of the United States, and ultimately we're looking at, could we be on the verge of seeing a pro-life generation? Could Generation Z, the generation to follow, could they be a generation that only knows pro-life in our nation, or at least in some states in our nation? But before we get back into discussion about that, I'd like to ask our producer, our program producer, Tim Schneider, if he could come and just give us some updates on what's going on around here at Stand in the Gap Media.
Hey, Isaac, thank you very much. Good Friday afternoon to everybody. Hopefully you're doing well, and thank you for listening. Just want to let you know about some things that are happening behind the scenes here at the American Pastors Network. We're on social media. If you do social media, please go and check us out. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter. We're on BitChute. We're on YouTube. Please check us out. Go and like us on Facebook. Look for American Pastors Network and Stand in the Gap Radio. Also on Twitter, you can follow us there by searching for those two places also, American Pastors Network and Stand in the Gap Radio. We're also on BitChute, as I said. You'll have to find us there by looking us up at Stand in the Gap Today or at Stand in the Gap Media. That's the best way to find us there on BitChute. You can find videos, articles, and many other things that we post there on our social media platforms. If you have not gone and looked at our social media stuff, we highly encourage you to do that. We also have two great websites, AmericanPastorsNetwork.net and StandInTheGapMedia.org. Please go and check out what is offered over there, too. Articles you can find there, archives of radio and TV programs. You can find a lot of different things. One of the really neat things we have over there is you can sign up for a couple of e-newsletters. One e-newsletter will allow you to get a weekly recap email of all the radio programs from the previous week, plus some clips of that program, plus the opportunity to read a transcript. So if you sign up for that over at AmericanPastorsNetwork.net, you can be on that newsletter. And also we have a prayer email newsletter that we send out about once every couple of months, so please consider praying for our organization and signing up for that. Once again, AmericanPastorsNetwork.net and StandInTheGapMedia.org. Also, as we were just mentioning, please pray for our ministry. If you want to get on our prayer e-newsletter list, I highly encourage you to do that. And just please pray for this ministry. We covet your prayers. We can't really do anything without prayer, so we highly ask you to please pray for our ministry. And if you want to know how you can pray for our ministry, please go ahead and sign up for that e-newsletter. Also, another thing is please consider giving financially. If you've been blessed by this ministry, please consider giving. No amount too big, no amount too small is too much. And if the Lord has blessed you through this ministry, please consider blessing us with some of your blessings so that we can continue to bless others. There's lots of blessing going on there. All right, Isaac, I'm going to go ahead and shoot it on back to you, and you are up.
All right. Well, thanks, Tim. And I would just encourage any of you who maybe you listen on radio regularly to look at podcasts, if that's something that you could get into, or at least go to StandInTheGapMedia.org. There's so much more out there taking from our radio program as well as the TV, as well as other ministries going on through the American Pastors Network. So, and I have found that it makes it easy to share on social media platforms like Twitter or Facebook to take a blurb of something, a little bit of this or a little bit of that, especially the podcast Q&As that Tim was talking about, or the transcripts, and you can take something from that you enjoyed from maybe a radio program you listened to or from a TV program, and then I often like to share those on my own personal Facebook page or my personal Twitter feed as well, and it's just really, really helpful. Well, Sam, I want to go back to Roe versus Wade. We're looking at almost 50 years since that decision was made, 1973, and now we're looking at 49 years later, it could possibly be struck down. And I'm wondering what changes we've seen in the last 5 decades that really make this a whole different ballgame in some ways than it used to be. You know, Sam, I just want to ask you first about the scientific and medical advancements and just get your opinion on how those advancements impact the issues surrounding abortion as we know more about it today than we did in 1973. So, for example, we know much more about the baby in the womb. We know that it's not just a clump of cells like we were originally told in the 70s. We can see the babies with better, newer equipment. We can see them very clearly, and even surgeries can be done before a baby is actually born. We also know that premature babies that are being born really, really early in situations that in the 1970s would have just said, well, the baby won't survive. They're able to help them survive and to live and to thrive, whereas before it wouldn't have been supposedly viable at that young of an age. So, Sam, what are your thoughts about this? As those medical and scientific advancements have been made, should that have an impact on how we think about abortion and the life of the baby in the womb?
Isaac, it absolutely should. And in reality, we know it does. Now, I was in the Pennsylvania House for 20 years. You mentioned that. One of the laws we passed there was a requirement, for instance, that pregnant moms, before they would ever have an abortion, would have to get a picture, sonogram taken of their baby so that they could see it. Well, that itself has been, what's been done across the country, has been extraordinarily impactful for young parents who say, wow, because they had bought into that line, it's just a clump of cells, it's not a baby yet. But then when they actually see it, that looks, lo and behold, there's a heart that's beating. As an example. It makes a huge difference. So, yes, so knowledge, if information is made available to particularly younger girls and guys, it does seem to have made a big difference. So all of that is good. So medical advances have actually done what medical advances generally have done, and that is to show how wonderfully we are all made. And that information in a right setting often can lead to a person making an informed decision, which is generally a better right decision. But you know, Isaac, but in the midst of all of this, the cultural rhetoric has not, I would say, not even kept up to pace with that medical. Instead, those who are bent on killing, those who are bent on death, have become even more extreme. So,
well,
that's
Sam,
amazing.
I was going to ask you about that in a couple of questions, but let's just go right to that question. It wasn't that long ago that he was the sitting governor of Virginia, and he was a doctor, former governor, now Northam. He was talking about the abortion law that they were trying to put into effect, very similar to what New York and other states have, that basically allow abortion up into the birth of the baby, which some would call basically infanticide. And he had this infamous quote, and I'm quoting from a BBC article here. And he says, so in this particular example, this is the governor talking, if a mother's in labor, I can tell you exactly what would happen. He told this to WTOP's Ask the Governor program. He said, the infant would be delivered. The infant would be, quote, kept comfortable. The infant would be resuscitated if that's what the mother and the family desired. And then a discussion would ensue between the physicians and the mother. Now, Sam, at that time, many were saying what he's talking about here isn't even abortion anymore. He's talking about infanticide. So, we see a lot of these pro-abortion groups are now pushing for later-term abortions, not just, abortion up to 15 weeks or 12 weeks or something like that, but now even promoting the idea that some would say that there are many flirting with or outright promoting the idea of after-birth abortion, they call it, or infanticide, as most of us would call it. So with all of our modern ability to see the humanity of babies before and after birth, what are your thoughts about this direction that some seem to be intent on going down?
Well, it's the same kind of thing that we're seeing on the other end of the scale. Oregon, just a couple of weeks ago, we covered it on our program a week ago with Twyla Braze. Oregon is just now going further down the road to take the lives by just giving them a pill of those who are sick. They call it mercy killing. It's euthanasia. It's death of old people, of older people. So it is back again, Isaac, to a worldview. If we believe that God is the giver of life, therefore then all life becomes sacred. If life is sacred, then we look at what God says, and he says, don't you dare take the innocent life of another person and shed their blood, or you will lose your life. God places a high value on all life. But if you once determine that life is dispensable, it's my determination what I determine about this baby in my belly as a mother or a culture views that way, then you begin to treat all life as of little value, and somebody can sit up and make a determination of what you want. Now, people not in this whole debate should not forget that during the Obama administration, we're over there fighting a battle, and we're talking about Ukraine and Russia war right now, right? When we were here, we were involved in Ukraine. The Obama administration, State Department, were telling Ukraine back then that we will not help you. Earlier on, may have even prevented this war from happening, but they would not help Ukraine unless Ukraine changed their constitution to say that it was right to kill babies, abortion, put it in the Constitution, and then they connected LGBTQ to it as well. Ukraine said we can't do that because we value life. Just a couple of days, just yesterday, I heard this other $40 billion being appropriated for Ukraine. There are members of this administration out there saying that in reality, they're going to try and put links on that to say there's money in there to actually help the people of Ukraine in the best possible way. Do you know what they actually said this morning? Find pregnant women, Ukrainian pregnant women, and help them abort their babies. That's exactly what they said this morning, that would be one of the most humane way to help the people of Ukraine right now. And I'm saying, literally, this is what, when you reject life, this is what you get to. You look for ways to take life.
That is sad. It's frightening to think that that's the philosophy coming from some parts in our own leadership of our country. But we want to be praying for everybody facing decisions about how to vote, everybody facing decisions about what to do if someone listening is expecting a baby, and just so much more. So we want to close our program with some more solutions and prayer. We'll be right back after this brief timeout.
From the time our children are born until the moment they leave our homes as young adults, Christian parents are given the privilege and responsibility of guiding them into a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. All during their growing years, they are influenced by the people and events around them. Sometimes these are out of our control, but many times we can make choices as to how they'll be educated, what church they'll attend, and the overall atmosphere of our home. If you've decided your child is best influenced by a biblical worldview education, you'll want to consider BJU Press homeschool materials. Dedicated to academic excellence, BJU Press offers a curriculum that not only assists you to pass along your values to your children, but makes it easy and affordable. The decisions made in response to the challenges and opportunities your child will face in life are largely determined by their internal spiritual compass. Is your child ready for the journey? Find out more at bjupress.com. That's bjupress.com.
For years, faithful Christians formed nonprofit foundations or trusts to preserve their ability to generously give to their favorite causes or ministries, even after their death. The problem? Professional managers, pressure from left-wing agendas, and even family members with opposing views hijacked the original donor intent. This is sad but true. But this subversion of purpose can be prevented. Hello, I'm Sam Rohrer of the American Pastors Network, and I'm glad to recommend Capstone Legacy Foundation in Wayne, Pennsylvania, an experienced and capable Christian community foundation, established to help you set up a ministry, a giving structure guaranteed not to be hijacked, or a place you can donate cash or non-cash assets like stocks, bonds, or property. Capstone's designed to help you achieve immediate tax savings and give you needed time to decide how to prayerfully allocate your giving. Contact Capstone at 610-688-8890 or visit them at capstonelegacy.org. This week I've identified thus far 4 biblical principles for the defense of God's design for marriage. Hello, I'm Sam Rohrer with the American Pastors Network and another Stand in the Gap Minute. At APN, we emphasize the authority of Scripture for deciding all areas of life and living, beginning with marriage, and we urge pastors and parents to live it and to defend it. The 5th biblical principle defending marriage is God's declaration in Ephesians 5 that physical marriage between one man and one woman is holy, and it pictures the spiritual relationship between Christ and the church. God's plan of redemption through Jesus Christ to the church is the picture of true love and unity between God and man, and why all efforts to redefine God's design of marriage is a direct attack on God Himself, His plan of redemption, and Jesus Christ. Will you join with us at Stand in the Gap Radio and TV in illustrating Christ's love for the church in our marriages and families? Stand with us at AmericanPastorsNetwork.net.
So, where was the Garden of Eden? This is Ken Ham, a publisher of the award-winning family magazine, Answers. Some Bible maps give a location for the Garden of Eden that's usually in the Middle East, near today's Tigris and Euphrates rivers. But does God's Word actually tell us that? Well, the Bible says God planted a garden in the east in Eden, and it says a river in Eden separated into 4 headwaters. Nothing like that exists today. That's because the global flood destroyed the world before the flood, including Eden. Now, we do have 2 rivers today, the Tigris and Euphrates, with the same names as 2 of Eden's rivers. Now, that's probably because Noah and his sons named new rivers after rivers from the old world, as people have done throughout history.
Get more answers when you visit us at AnswersRadio.com and view a complete transcript of this program, listen to the program again, and more at AnswersRadio.com.
You're listening to Stand in the Gap today. For more information, visit our website at standinthegapradio.com.
Well, Sam, as we're here in our last part of the program, but my whole life, and even before I was even born or thought of, or before my parents were even married or knew each other, Roe v. Wade has just been a part of the culture of every generation from 1973 forward. And looking at the fact that we're on the precipice of possibly in the next few weeks seeing the Supreme Court overturn that to knock it down and say that wasn't correct, that shouldn't have been precedent. This is really monumental, I guess I would say. This is really potentially, we're about to see a pro-life opportunity for the next generation. So I want to talk to you about that and how it's happened. And it's also interesting to me because when you look at Donald Trump as a president, before he was elected, we didn't know. He had never been elected to anything. We didn't know what he would be like. But looking at his history, looking at his past lifestyle and his statements, there were many of us that highly doubted he was truly committed to a pro-life biblical worldview that would say, life begins in the womb and those sort of things. But to see his policies and how much of a stand he took, that he would come and be a part of the March for Life, things like that. And then these three Supreme Court justices that were nominated by him while he was president, that he was there for such a time as that. Very, very interesting. And again, we don't know for sure what's going to happen. We're basing all this off of supposed leaks. But this has been an issue for many Christians that have decided to run for office. And something I want to talk about, or have you talk about, Sam, is that there are a lot of people to vote for, not just the president. So, of course, people are, thinking forward to 2024, the next presidential election. But this year, 2022, for those states that still have primary races coming up, and then in the fall with the elections, those elections are also very important. The people who are in the Senate, the people who are in the Congress, the people in the state Congress and state, the governors and all these other local and state positions are very important this year as much as 2024. Because if this does become the new, law of the land, that Roe v. Wade isn't set up anymore, then it's going to be decided at the state level. So, Sam, could you maybe talk about how, maybe this was played a part when you decided to run for office and you went into public service, as well as maybe you could talk about our friend Kathy Barnett, for example, who's been on this program. You interviewed her, and then she was just on a week ago on our program again. But she actually, her story of surviving what could have been an abortion because her mom was raped as a child and conceived her at 11 years old, and her mom chose life for her, and it has played a role. She said she had never imagined, you knew her through the homeschool movement, she had never imagined she would run for office. Now the Lord has her running for Senate in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania against Dr. Oz and different ones like that. But she's very strong pro-life, and her testimony of what her mother went through has played a big part in why she is running. And I'm wondering if maybe something like that for you, that the abortion issue, pro-life issue, was a reason why you also, one of the reasons you ran for office. I'd just like to get your opinion on that as we wrap these things up today.
Well, just a couple quick comments. Number one, the matter of life, as well as most other moral issues, are most importantly decided on the state level. So no matter where people are listening to this program, it is vitally important that they consider this issue among others of those that they put in any position of governor, lieutenant governor, House, Senate, Attorney General of the state, and all the way down to the local county level. It is very, very important, more important there than even on the national level. And if the court reverses Roe versus Wade, what I just said there will be magnified manyfold because that's where the decisions will be made. Number two, as far as when I ran, was the fact that that was pro-life important to me? Yeah, I ran when I was 1992. I was graduating from high school in 1973. That ages me, shows me where I am, when Roe versus Wade was put into place. When I ran, I certainly ran as a pro-life person because it was an issue, a distinguishing factor. So I ran as a traditional values, pro-life, pro-Second Amendment candidate because it helped to define what I believed. It was very, very, very important. Fundamentally, what I do is I don't even consider a candidate to vote for if they are not convincingly pro-life, and that means I go as far as saying without exception. It doesn't make an exception. Now, you've got some states actually dealing with that right now, no exception. Because if you're really pro-life, that's where you must be. Anything that prematurely or humanly effort takes the life of that implanted cell, that fertilized cell, is abortion. No matter what you call it, that's what it is. So that's where I would go on that. So, Isaac, I think it's a fundamental thing. Just because somebody, though, is pro-life, I'm going to say, does not mean that they are going to vote morally, biblically, or with a biblical worldview on all the other issues. It does not mean that that person is going to be not given to bribery or corruption. It doesn't mean that at all. But what I have found in office is that if somebody is not pro-life, it really sets them up for all those other things. I can't find that. I have never found somebody that I could really trust significantly on what they would do on any given issues if I knew that they were not straight and right on that matter of life. So it's fundamental, and it means a lot in so many ways.
It does. It so much so. And as we get ready to close this program in prayer, I think we need to remind ourselves constantly, we need to be in prayer for our nation, for our leaders, and over this. And again, all my life, we've been praying for the reversal of Roe v. Wade, and now it could be meant to be that God will lead that to happen here in the next few weeks. We don't know. Sam, I think we want to keep encouraging our listeners to pray for this to be struck down, for Roe v. Wade to be struck down, but then for the different states and local levels, for righteous people to stand up and to help people who are making these difficult decisions, and to help those young couples or young ladies who feel like that's their best decision, to help show them a better way, a godly way, a biblical worldview. And so many listeners know people who have brought people into their home and either adopted babies or brought maybe a young woman from a bad situation where they could have a better environment. But if this does change, Sam, if it does, Roe v. Wade does get struck down, what sort of things should we be praying for and looking for ways to get involved? I want to have you answer that, and then if there's time, go ahead and close this in prayer as well.
Well, I guess a couple things. Ultimately, the matter of whether or not a baby is killed in the womb is a personal decision, Isaac, regardless of what the government does or says, or what the court does or says. God deals with nations when governments in those in positions actually declare to be lawful that which is not and good to be bad, and so forth. We know that there's an issue there. But ultimately, each person needs to be informed. Each person needs to make a decision whether or not life is from God or life is just a matter of what I choose it to be. I think the pulpits of America, we know less than 9% of the pulpits of America, Isaac, even preach one sermon on life or abortion. You'd say, wow. Yeah, I'd say, wow, too. So if we're going to have a renewed generation of young people who are actually going to hold to life, it's going to happen when they decide for themselves and they come to this determination. The pulpits re-engage and begin to teach what God says about why life is moral and why we're created in the image of God. And then reflected by those who are in office, who says our job is not to advance the lowest common denominator of bondage and death, but it's to raise up and lift up the higher standard of what God lays out about the value of life and justice and truth. It's not one area only, Isaac. It's really all who are listening based on whatever their issue and their aspect in life is.
Well, amen. And I hope that all of you who are listening will take this to heart. You'll be praying for our nation, praying for the young people of our nation, and praying for our leaders, both those who are elected and those who are running to be elected. And may God receive all the glory from that. Well, thanks so much for listening, Sam. Thanks so much for all of your good input and your answers today. Please continue to pray for us here at Stand in the Gap Media and the American Pastors Network. And wherever you are, whatever you're doing, remember to stand in the gap for truth.
If you liked today's program, tell a friend. You'll also want to hear Stand in the Gap Weekend and watch the nationally syndicated Stand in the Gap TV program. We present the news of the day truthfully, carefully, and consistently from a biblical worldview and constitutional perspective. If you're hungry for the truth, visit standinthegapmedia.org to find all our programs and the stations that carry them. While you're there, be sure to download our free app and support this ministry with your best financial gift. Then join us again right here Monday through Friday for another program of Stand in the Gap Today.